You think you're in control, but your mind has already been programmed to comply, to stay silent, to repeat. You confuse suppression with strength. You call your silence wisdom. You name your passivity maturity. But the truth is, every time you explode over something small, every time you bury what you feel, every time you say yes just to keep the peace, you're not being calm. You're being predictable. And that predictability is what makes you easy to manage, not by tyrants, but by anyone who understands how the human mind works. According to a study from Yale School of Management, most emotional decisions are made before the conscious brain even registers the stimulus. In other words, you react before you even know you're reacting. And those who understand that, they don't need to raise their voice to command you. They just push where you're already broken. This isn't about becoming cold. It's about recognizing that someone has already figured out your code. Someone, maybe even you, has been using your need to be liked, to be peaceful, to be morally good, as a way to keep you quiet. That's why this isn't a video for those who want to seem calm. It's for those exhausted from being eaten alive in silence. Carl Jung once said, "What you do not bring to consciousness appears in your life as fate." That's not metaphor. That's architecture. Your unexamined fears, your reflexive guilt, your need to keep harmony at all costs. They shape your reactions, your decisions, your relationships. And when you're not aware of what's guiding you, someone else will be. Machiavelli wasn't a monster. He wasn't teaching cruelty. He was revealing how power behaves beneath the surface. He wrote for those who wanted to survive in a world that punishes naivety. He who understands the weakness of others, he said, rules without needing to be feared, because understanding makes force unnecessary. It turns fear into quiet influence. And influence, when internalized, feels like your own idea. That's the purest form of manipulation, when the chains feel like freedom. You don't need to be told to shut up. You do it yourself. You don't need to be threatened to comply. You do it to avoid discomfort. You carry within you the instructions they whispered to you long ago. Don't be too much. Don't make noise. Don't make anyone uncomfortable. Don't feel that. Don't say that. Don't want that. But all that repressed anger, that hidden urgency, that denied fire, it doesn't vanish. It mutates. It becomes anxiety, self-sabotage, chronic exhaustion, fake smiles, forced kindness. It becomes a script that you call normal because no one ever showed you it was written for you. This video is a confrontation with that script. These are not 5 tips. They are 5 forbidden laws. Truths that were kept from you because if you knew them, you'd stop being emotionally useful. You'd stop being easy to guilt, easy to manipulate, easy to discard. You're being manipulated, not just by others, but by every emotion you were trained to suppress. Every unhealed story that still whispers in your reactions. And unless you learn to see through it, to reclaim the parts of yourself you were told to fear, you'll keep confusing suppression with strength. Let's begin. They never taught you how to use your rage, only how to hide it. From a young age, they told you anger was dangerous, that it made you wrong, that it made you hard to love. So you started to disguise it. You smiled when you were dismissed. You stayed silent when crossed. You called it strength, but it wasn't strength. It was fear dressed as virtue. This is where the first forbidden law of emotional control reveals itself. Anger is not to be repressed. It is to be used. Not to lash out, not to destroy, but to mark what is sacred, to draw a line that no one crosses without consequence. Not all power is loud. Some power is cold, precise, and quiet, like a door that closes once and never opens again. You were trained to associate self-control with submission, to shrink instead of confront, to negotiate your discomfort in exchange for temporary peace. But here's the truth no one told you. Repressed anger becomes shame. Shame becomes passivity. And passivity becomes a life where everyone feels free to use you because they know you won't push back. Anger, when seen with clarity, is not chaos. It's a boundary alarm. It tells you, this was too much. It says, this ends here. When you ignore it, you end up explaining yourself to people who aren't listening, pleading for kindness from those who benefit from your silence. The problem isn't that you feel too much. It's that you've never been taught how to command what you feel. Machiavelli wasn't obsessed with cruelty. He was obsessed with stability. It is much safer to be feared than loved if you cannot be both, he wrote. Not because fear is better, but because love without strength invites exploitation. Real control isn't about appearing calm. It's about being unshakable, unavailable for emotional games, clear enough to see manipulation before it forms. Science agrees. Researchers at Stanford found that suppressing emotions leads to higher stress responses than confronting them consciously. That means every time you swallow your anger to seem composed, your body pays the price. You're not winning by staying calm. You're burning from the inside out. People don't respect suppressed fire. They respect the person who holds it without apology. The one who doesn't explode, but also doesn't explain. Who knows exactly when to speak, and when silence is sharper than any word. That's the kind of emotional presence that changes rooms without raising a voice. You try being good, being easy, being soft. It only made people expect more silence from you. At some point, you have to decide, will you keep pretending peace while you erode in silence? Or will you learn to carry your rage like a crown, not loud, but visible? If this opened your eyes even a little, and you want this message to reach more people like you, support what we're building. Hit subscribe. That's all we ask. The fire you've buried isn't your enemy. It's the signal you've ignored for too long. And once you stop running from it, everything changes. You think reacting quickly is a strength. That solving things fast means you're emotionally evolved. But speed isn't control. It's often just panic with polish. Because when your reaction is automatic, when your response happens before you even realize what triggered it, you're not responding. You're reliving. This is the second forbidden law of emotional control. Your predictability is your greatest weakness. The people who understand you best are not always the ones who love you most. Sometimes they're the ones who've learned exactly what makes you spiral. They know your patterns. They've memorized your guilt. They've studied how fast you rush to make peace. And they use that speed against you. Every time you try to fix a situation too quickly, you give yourself away. You reveal your fear of abandonment, your fear of conflict, your fear of being misunderstood. And once someone knows that, they never need to overpower you. They just wait for you to overpower yourself. That's not self-control. That's emotional exposure. We've been taught that good people react fast, that they don't let misunderstandings linger, that they clarify, soothe, explain. But there's a cost to that urgency. It tells others, I fear being seen as wrong more than I value being respected. And respect never survives where fear dictates the terms. A Machiavellian strategist would never respond immediately. He would watch, read the silence, track the motives. Because reacting too quickly doesn't just show your emotions, it reveals your wounds. It signals that your value is up for negotiation. And that you'll pay with your dignity just to keep the connection. This isn't about playing games. It's about refusing to be predictable. Because the emotionally predictable are the emotionally dominated. Not with chains, with expectations, with triggers, with old roles that you keep reenacting. The fixer, the pleaser, the peacekeeper, thinking that's who you are, when in fact, it's who you were trained to be. The truth is, most people aren't reacting to the present moment. They're reacting to old fears disguised as urgency. They need to answer fast, to clear things up, to avoid tension at all costs. It's not your personality. It's your programming. And it was installed the moment you learned that your emotional survival depended on being acceptable. But emotional control is not about speed. It's about pause, stillness, the ability to let someone else sit with discomfort without jumping in to rescue them or yourself. Because sometimes silence is not avoidance. It's sovereignty. Think of the people you instinctively respect. Not the ones who talk the most, but the ones who speak only when they mean it. Who don't react. Who make you wait. Not out of cruelty, but clarity. They move with intention. And that intention carries power. Because unpredictability, when anchored in presence, commands attention. So here's your shift. The next time something triggers you, wait. Don't explain. Don't fix. Don't rush. Watch. What's being asked of you? To rescue a dynamic that's never respected you? To apologize for someone else's projections? To keep a fragile peace that never includes your needs? Start treating your silence not as shame, but as strategy. Because the moment you stop reacting on cue, you stop being a puppet, and you start becoming the one who rewrites the script. You've spent your life trying to be good, to be kind, to do what's right. But have you ever stopped to ask, whose definition of right are you obeying? Because the third forbidden law of emotional control is this: every moral you inherited was once someone's tool for domination. We're taught that being a good person means staying polite, agreeable, accommodating. That strength is suspect and boundaries are harsh. That it's noble to be patient with those who violate you and rude to walk away without explanation. But this isn't virtue. It's submission dressed in manners. You weren't born thinking this way. You were conditioned, slowly, repeatedly, until your own discomfort began to feel like a moral failing. Until your silence became a badge of honor. Until every time you said no, guilt followed, like you'd broken a sacred law. But whose law was it, really? Machiavelli warned that morality, when detached from power, becomes a liability. A man who strives after goodness in all his acts, he wrote, is sure to come to ruin among the many who are not good. He wasn't glorifying cruelty. He was exposing the naivete of believing that integrity alone protects you in a world that rewards performance over truth. Because what's praised as good is often just what makes others comfortable. If your honesty disrupts the script, you're called intense. If your boundaries inconvenience someone, you're called difficult. And if your strength makes others face their own weakness, you're called cold. So you learn to shrink, to soften, to betray yourself in small, daily ways until you barely recognize your own voice. The problem is that morality without consciousness doesn't liberate, it enslaves. It teaches you to follow rules you never agreed to feel proud of behavior that leaves you depleted, to apologize for needs you never learned to name. And over time, it programs you to believe that being liked is proof of being good. But here's the twist. Those who benefit from your self-erasure will always call it love. They'll praise your loyalty, your compassion, your selflessness. Because as long as you uphold the image of the noble giver, they never have to give anything back. And you'll keep confusing sacrifice with virtue, guilt with responsibility, approval with connection, until the pain becomes too quiet to scream and too constant to notice. That's not character. That's a trap. The way out isn't rebellion for its own sake. It's clarity. It's looking at each moral reflex and asking, does this align with who I am? Or was this installed in me to keep me manageable? Because once you start asking those questions, everything shifts. You stop apologizing for being hard to manipulate. You stop calling your silence maturity. You stop mistaking obedience for love. True morality begins where conditioning ends. And your power begins where your guilt is no longer the leash around your voice. You keep calling it intuition, but most of the time, it's just fear wearing a familiar face. That gut feeling? Sometimes it's not wisdom. It's trauma rehearsing the past. The fourth forbidden law of emotional control is this. You don't feel. You react to what you've learned to fear. Your nervous system isn't objective. It doesn't tell you what's true. It tells you what feels familiar. And if your past is filled with chaos, manipulation, rejection, then calm might feel threatening. Respect might feel suspicious. Stability might feel boring. That's how deep the programming goes. You think you're making choices, but in reality, you're following a script, one written in childhood, reinforced in relationships where love came with conditions and safety meant silence. Every time someone raises their voice, your body prepares to apologize. Every time someone pulls away, you rush to fix it. Not because you chose to, but because some part of you still believes your worth is tied to emotional repair. That's not intuition. That's imprint. That's your trauma making the decisions for you. And as long as you mistake that reaction for instinct, you'll never be free. You'll keep avoiding what's unfamiliar, even when it's healthy. You'll keep chasing what's destructive just because it feels like home. Emotional control doesn't mean numbing out. It means decoding your own reactions. asking, is this fear or is this memory? Is this danger or discomfort? Am I making a choice or following a reflex? Those questions are not easy, but they're necessary because real power doesn't come from avoiding pain. It comes from recognizing when pain is no longer current, but historical. Carl Jung wrote that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. What you call destiny might just be repetition. What you call attraction might just be the reenactment of a role you were forced to play. And what you call your type might be the shape of your oldest wound. Think about it. How often do you explain away your discomfort? I just have a bad feeling. I don't want to cause conflict. I'm not sure, but something feels off. But what if the feeling isn't about them? It's about your body warning you not to change the pattern. Because changing the pattern would mean giving up the illusion of control you've created by always knowing what's coming, even if what's coming hurts you. This is why the idea of control is so deceptive. You think you're being cautious, but really, you're being loyal to the version of yourself that survived by anticipating rejection, absorbing blame, disappearing before things got ugly. But survival is not freedom. To control your emotions, you must first stop obeying them. Not by denying them, but by studying them. By learning which feelings are messengers and which are echoes. Because if you can't tell the difference, you'll keep treating old wounds like present threats and acting like a victim when you could be a strategist. The power isn't in the reaction. It's in the pause, the awareness, the refusal to be pulled by a ghost. That's what control really looks like. Not silence, but lucidity. Not resistance, but recognition. Not running from emotion, but learning exactly whose voice it carries. You tell yourself you just want peace. That you're tired of drama, of tension, of unnecessary fights. But what you call peace might actually be fear. Because the fifth forbidden law of emotional control is this. Those who fear conflict surrender their crown without realizing it. Not every battle needs to be fought, but not every silence is wisdom. Sometimes silence is self-erasure. Sometimes it's just a disguise for the terror of being disliked, of being misjudged, of being seen as too much. So you shrink, you soften, you try to be palatable, even when something inside you is begging to be loud. The desire to avoid conflict at all costs doesn't come from calm. It comes from history. Maybe the first time you raised your voice, it cost you connection. Maybe the first time you said no, someone punished you with silence. Maybe you learned that disagreement meant abandonment. And ever since, you've been negotiating your truth in exchange for temporary safety. But here's the truth no one says out loud. Peace is not the absence of war. Peace is knowing that, if necessary, you can go to war and not lose yourself in the process. That if someone crosses a line, you won't crumble. That if something threatens your dignity, you won't hesitate to walk away. The fear of conflict is often the fear of being seen as bad. And that fear is exactly what manipulators feed on. They know you'd rather bend than be judged. They know you'd rather absorb than confront. They know you'll do anything to seem kind, even betray yourself. Kierkegaard once wrote, "The greatest despair is not to be who you are." And every time you avoid conflict that needs to happen, that's what you're doing. You're not protecting the relationship. You're protecting a role, one that was never yours to begin with. The role of the peacemaker, the understanding one, the emotionally responsible adult who cleans up everyone else's mess. But where does that leave you? Sitting in silence while your boundaries are crossed, smiling while your truth gets diluted, holding in words that could set you free, because you fear being called cold, difficult, selfish. You're not selfish. You're exhausted, and the world has mistaken your exhaustion for grace. You were never meant to be agreeable at all costs. You were meant to be whole, to speak when it's uncomfortable, to hold your line even when it shakes, to be someone whose presence commands respect, not because you're feared, but because you're not afraid to be misunderstood. The ones who are most respected are not always the nicest. They are the clearest. They know that conflict isn't chaos. It's contrast. It's where values are tested, where truth is revealed, where people show you who they really are when you stop saying yes to everything. Stop treating your aversion to conflict like a virtue. It's not. It's a wound. One that's kept you small. One that's made your silence more comfortable than your voice. You don't need to start fights, but you do need to stop flinching every time one shows up. Because the crown doesn't belong to the calmest. It belongs to the one who can hold fire without apologizing for the heat. You thought emotional control meant appearing composed, but that was never the point. The real control, the kind no one teaches, doesn't live in appearances. It lives in lucidity. In the moment you stop lying to yourself about what you feel, why you react, and what you've allowed in the name of peace. Carl Jung warned us, the shadow we refuse to face doesn't disappear. It acts. It decides. It speaks in our name when we go silent. It chooses our partners, our patterns, our self-destruction. And because we don't see it, we blame the world, never realizing we're being ruled by what we try to bury. Most people aren't fighting their enemies. They're fighting their own unintegrated pain, their childhood disappointments, their inherited beliefs, their need to be loved at any cost. And until you confront that machinery, that invisible system running inside you, you'll keep calling your submission maturity and your patterns fate. Nietzsche said, "He who cannot command himself must obey." And this is where everything comes together. The shadow, the rage, the silence, the patterns, they are not problems to fix. They are forces to confront. And whoever refuses that confrontation will always be governed, not just by others, but by every memory they mistook for identity. You've spent years trying to control your reactions, trying not to be too much, trying to seem good, calm, agreeable. But that version of you wasn't control. It was a costume, one you wore because somewhere along the line, you learned it was safer to be useful than to be whole. Now you've seen what was hidden. The 5 forbidden laws don't give you new emotions. They expose the emotional structure already guiding your life. And that awareness? That's the beginning of true control. The kind that doesn't make you louder, but harder to move, harder to read, harder to use. This isn't about becoming untouchable. It's about becoming honest. And that kind of honesty makes you unpredictable. Not because you're erratic, but because you're no longer acting out a role. You've stopped responding like the person they trained. You've started choosing like someone who remembers who they were before the scripts. There's a moment when that shift happens. It's not dramatic. It's quiet. A conversation you don't chase. A silence you don't fill. A boundary you don't explain. A fire you don't hide. And suddenly, you're not reacting anymore. You're watching, deciding, leading. That's when you realize emotional control was never about killing the chaos. It was about commanding it, not through fear, but through clarity. And that clarity, earned through pain, through pause, through brutal self-honesty, becomes your new language. One that doesn't seek approval, one that doesn't beg to be seen. It just is, like a throne in the dark. Because real power doesn't need light. It just needs presence. And presence is what remains when every false layer burns away, and you still choose to stay. If this found you at the right moment, tell us. Leave a comment. Follow this page, not out of obligation, but because something rare deserves to continue. We're not here to be liked. We're here to wake up the parts of you that were trained to stay asleep. And from here on out, no one holds your crown but you.